This week is all about individual differences. In class, we talked about emotions, mood, and personality, and this week's online mini lecture is about attitudes and job satisfaction. There are three major components to attitude. The first is affective, and that is concerning the feelings that somebody is experiencing while they're experiencing this attitude. The second component is behavioral. These are the actions that an individual takes with regard to that attitude. And the third is cognitive. These are the thoughts and evaluations that accompany an attitude that somebody has. I'm going to talk a little bit more in a moment about job satisfaction as an attitude, but it's a fairly straightforward term, and so I'll use that as an example here. If somebody is experiencing job satisfaction, that is, they're satisfied with their job, the affective component of that attitude generally would be considered positive. Now, we can break that down into specific moods or emotions, but for now, let's just keep it general and say that if somebody is experiencing job satisfaction, the feelings, the affective component of that attitude will generally be positive. If somebody is experiencing job satisfaction, some behavioral components that we might see include actions that the individual might take. For example, they might go above and beyond their specified job description when carrying out their job duties, or they may be just generally pleasant when interacting with others in the workplace. The third component of attitude is cognitive, and these thoughts and evaluations are a part of a person's attitude. With regard specifically to job satisfaction, somebody's thoughts and evaluations may be something along the lines of thinking to themselves, hey, I really like my job. It may be something as simple as that. Now, for any given attitude that an individual is experiencing, one or more of these three components may be present or absent. One may be expressing itself more strongly than others. So, for example, we may or may not see behaviors associated with an attitude. An individual may be experiencing an attitude from a more affective and or cognitive standpoint, in which case we might not see that. Attitudes and behaviors. Do they appear together? Does one follow the other? Can they feed on each other? The answer is yes, yes, and yes. Attitudes and behaviors can appear together. They don't necessarily always do, but they can. Sometimes somebody will have an attitude but not express behaviors, in which case it might be difficult for us to understand what that individual's attitude is. On the other hand, if they are appearing together and somebody is acting out the attitude that they're experiencing, then it may be easier for us to perceive the attitude that that individual has. They can follow each other. That is, behaviors can follow attitudes, and attitudes can follow behaviors. I would encourage you to think about situations in which one follows the other. So, for example, can you think of a time when you yourself or you have observed somebody where they have behaved in a certain way, and then you're able to interpret or understand the attitude that they have, in that the attitude follows that behavior? Likewise, can you think of an example where an individual or yourself, you're experiencing an attitude and then that leads to a behavior as a result of that attitude? In general terms, they do follow one or the other, and there is really no dominant pattern. They absolutely can feed on each other. So if an individual is experiencing an attitude and that leads to a behavior, that behavior can reinforce that attitude or undermine that attitude. And so not only can they feed on each other in kind of an additive way or a multiplicative way even, but they can also neutralize each other. There are 5 major job attitudes that I'm going to talk about in this mini lecture. The first is job involvement. This is the degree to which a person identifies with their job and actively participates in it. Someone with high job involvement feels that their performance is tied to their self-worth. The key way to understanding job involvement is to focus on the word identifies, or think about the concept of identification. Somebody with a high level of job involvement identifies themselves with the job. So if you were, for example, to ask them, if you were meeting somebody for the first time and say, hi, my name is Jennifer. What's your name? The person may say, oh, hi, it's nice to meet you. I'm Susan. I'm a nurse. If they associate their name with their job, that would be an example of a high level of identification. So you see people in professions like nursing and teaching, where individuals are very passionate about what they do, and so they quickly identify themselves not just by their name, but by the job that they do. So again, the word I want you to key in on here is identification. Somebody with a high job involvement um, identifies strongly with their job. In other words, their job is a major portion of their identity, their own perceived identity. I would encourage you to think for just a moment about some ways that this could be a good thing for employees and some ways that this might be a bad thing for employees. The next major job attitude is organizational commitment. Organizational commitment is the degree to which someone identifies with a particular organization and its mission and values. A person with high organizational commitment wants to stay with the organization. As is the case with job involvement, the key term here is identification. Whereas job involvement refers to identification with the job itself, when we talk about organizational commitment, we're talking about a person identifying with the organization. Usually, the basis for this is a shared set of values between the person and the organization. So, for example, one of the major values that the Starbucks Coffee Company espouses along a number of fronts. So, it's included in their mission statement, their value statement, and in a number of other documents that are presented both internally to employees within the organization and externally, is this idea of treating others with respect and dignity. And so, if you're an employee of the Starbucks Coffee Company and you value treating others with respect and dignity, and you're in this organization, you're seeing it everywhere in the mission statement, set of core values. People are actually behaving that way toward each other. When you share that value with the organization, you're going to have a stronger sense of organizational commitment. Again, I'd like for you to take just a moment and think about some ways that this might be a good thing for the employee, for the organization, and some ways that this might be a bad thing for the employee or the organization. The next major job attitude is perceived organizational support. This is the degree to which an employee believes that the organization values their contributions and cares about their well being. This is important because employees who perceive that the organization is supporting them will view that as a positive exchange relationship and they will put more back into the organization. It kind of makes sense if an employee feels as though the organization is supporting them, they're going to support the organization. Organizations do a lot of things to communicate their support for employees. Some of these things can be tangible, transactional things like generous pay, benefits, bonuses, and other types of compensation packages. Sometimes organizations do things that aren't necessarily that visible. There may be management training programs to help managers interact in more positive ways with employees. Organizations may uh, coach and train managers in the development of employees specifically. And so these would be some ways, some kind of non-transactional or intangible ways that organizations can communicate their support to employees. Next up is employee engagement. This is a person's involvement with, satisfaction with, and enthusiasm for the work that they do. A lot of times individuals will have a difficult time distinguishing job involvement from employee engagement. Job involvement is identification with the job itself. Remember the key term there being identification, and think also about the job itself in terms of the job title. So the example I mentioned is that someone might introduce themselves as a nurse or as a teacher. Employee engagement refers to a positive attitude for the work itself. So somebody might not necessarily identify with being a nurse or a healthcare provider, but they may be very enthusiastic about patient care. They may believe very passionately in a high level of patient care. And so they will work very diligently and they'll be very engaged in the actual work that they do on a day-to-day basis. The last major job attitude is job satisfaction, and this is a major attitude that researchers in organizational behavior are interested in. In fact, job satisfaction is one of the key outcomes that organizational behavior, as a scholarly area of research, this is one of the major outcomes that organizational behavior scholars look at. Because this has been researched so extensively, we know that several things contribute to job satisfaction. Here are a list of them: interesting work, training opportunities, the variety that somebody experiences on the job, the autonomy that somebody experiences on the job, the control that somebody has over what they do on a day to day basis on the job, feedback that they receive while on the job, and that includes both positive and negative feedback, as long as the negative feedback is constructive. And then lastly, the social support and interaction with coworkers that can be found on the job. When we talk about job satisfaction, a lot of people think first or right away, or they ask pretty quickly, what about pay? The relationship between pay and job satisfaction is somewhat elastic. And I'm using that term kind of from an economics perspective. So that is, up to a certain amount of pay, pay does have a positive relationship to job satisfaction. And that amount, it's pretty flexible. The research information that I have is several years old, and probably about 10 years ago, that dollar amount was about $40,000. So, up to the point that somebody was making $40,000, there was a direct positive relationship between pay and job satisfaction. In general terms, at the point at which somebody is making enough money to be comfortable in providing the basic necessities for themselves, pay becomes less and less important to job satisfaction. So just to kind of summarize, up to a certain point of income, pay does have a relationship with job satisfaction, but once somebody's fairly comfortable, then all of these other things quickly become much more important to job satisfaction than pay does. We also know a lot about the impacts of job satisfaction. So what are some of the outcomes when people are satisfied with their job or, on the other hand, dissatisfied with their job? The little signs after each of the words or phrases here indicate the nature of the relationship between job satisfaction and the outcome that's listed. So, for example, job satisfaction has a positive relationship with job performance. That is, the more satisfied somebody is on the job, the better their performance. Job satisfaction also has a positive relationship with customer satisfaction. It has a negative relationship with absenteeism. That's pretty straightforward as well. The more satisfied somebody is on the job, the less absenteeism they'll engage in. And absenteeism here includes things like coming in late, leaving early, just not coming into work at all. Turnover is when somebody leaves the organization, another straightforward kind of relationship here between job satisfaction and turnover. So the more satisfied somebody is with their job, the less likely they are to leave. Workplace deviance is kind of the opposite of organizational citizenship behaviors. So these are behaviors that individuals engage in on the job that are counterproductive to the organization. So it could be something like theft from the organization, something as extreme as embezzlement, or something as minor as taking post-it notes from the supply room. And there's a negative relationship there. So people who are more satisfied with their job engage in less workplace deviance. Lastly, a tremendous amount of research has indicated that job satisfaction has a positive impact to the bottom line. So the more satisfied people are in the workplace, in general terms, the more profitable an organization is. And that's all I have for you on attitudes and job satisfaction.